lessons to teach us. So, Nick, this is yours.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So I have a question. I have a question for everybody who works in cybersecurity. I presume you were here at the keynote. So that means you all work in cybersecurity now, is that correct? A little bit louder. I know it's the first talk in the afternoon. The dress is nowhere near as good as Tanya's. Do we all work in cybersecurity now, or will do by the end of this conference? Yes. That's better. That'll do for the afternoon. So, for security people, I have a question. If we're all so smart, which we are, you know how smart the people are in this industry. If we work so hard, especially again in this industry, you know how hard people work. You think about the state of cybersecurity. Why is it so awful, considering the first two factors? That's the question I have. I expect you will have questions as well. My contact details will be up at the end. All references in this presentation either have been blogged or will be blogged, to be honest, eventually. I'm still thinking some of this through. Thank you very much to Mandy for making me look really bad, who's put her slides up already. Nicely done. This is not a typical presentation. This is not really a linear presentation. This is more what you see in those crime dramas on TV. This is an investigation wall. This is a crime wall. In trying to solve that question, why are things so awful? I have a few ideas. I've put them up on the wall, put ideas and strings between them, trying to figure this out. I've only got time this afternoon to show you a few of the ideas I have. And also some of what I've got is seedlings. It really is the beginning of an idea. I don't have solutions, I don't have answers. I'm maybe getting to the stage of asking the right question. For a framework to build this investigation on, I'm basically stealing someone else's idea, someone else's slides. The presentation, Win the Cyberwar with Zero Trust, by John Kindervag, Field CTO of Palo Alto. Now, he gives a presentation where he explains the 4 levels of war: grand strategy, strategy, tactics, operations, as you see, from the ultimate goal all the way down to the way you use your tools. Now, in cyber war, same again, grand strategy is stop data breaches, all the way down to tactics being the tools you use and operations being the platform that those tools sit on. What I like about his presentation is that he looks at strategy, which I don't think we do enough in this industry, rather than tactics, rather than looking at tools. For cyber war, the strategy is the big idea. In each section, what's their big idea in that part of the industry? Now, credit due especially to Morgan Roman earlier. As I've just said, we don't talk about strategy enough. That's literally what he did this morning. As in, make the secure way the easy way is the strategy of what he advocated, and then listed some tools, but the tools and the strategy were independent of each other. So looking at, appropriately for where we are, the big idea of Dev, Sec, and Ops, the areas I'm most familiar with, either because I was a penetration tester or I've worked with a lot of developers. What's the big idea in each of these areas? For developers, it's be the best developer you can. Be that mythical 10x developer who's just better than everyone else, and as a good developer, you harden your code. As a penetration tester, be the best penetration tester you can be. You have to have continual technical improvement. There are always more vulnerabilities. You should learn those vulnerabilities because you use the flaw hypothesis methodology. The only way your customers are more secure is if you test those security weaknesses and see if it applies to them. For operations, you follow the CIS top 20 critical security controls. It's all about harden your systems. This is how system administrators think. So this is how we learn and train and act. As I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the process late at night, you on your laptop, on your own, spinning up VMs, lots of passion put into your project, becoming the best technical practitioner you can be. Also with the applications you develop, the applications you build, you basically build the best robot you can. You build the best application you can, you build the best infrastructure you can, you then send it out into the world on its own, see how it gets on. If it gets compromised, you build a better robot and send that out. So that's our grand strategy. Be the best technical practitioner you can be, build something as secure as you can build it. Where has this got us? If you look at breachlevelindex.com since 2013, there have been almost 15 billion data records lost or stolen since 2013. If you just look at the news quickly, Toyota had a business email compromised. They lost $37 million and will need to change their earnings forecast in August 2019. I forget the manufacturer, the internet radios. There are 1 million radios online with a vulnerability that's older than at least half this audience. If you look at Evite, the social planning website, in April 2019, they identified that they were compromised in April 2019, they identified they had been compromised in August 2013. So we're looking at a 6-year dwell time, over 100 million user details compromised. Canva, graphic design website, 137 million. Chegg, textbook rental website, 40 million users, compromised April 2018, revealed August 2019. Poshmark, social commerce marketplace, 37 million accounts. Breach, May 2018, announced August 2019. And if you thought hackers had everything, Poshmark when Poshmark was compromised, hackers got your names, emails, locations, gender, password, and size preferences. The size of your clothing is on the dark web now, is the state we've got in cybersecurity. And I thought this was as bad as it would get for this part of the presentation. Then I looked at the news this morning. Almost every citizen of Ecuador has their personal details on an open cloud server, which VPN Mentor discovered, told the relevant cert that's now been shut down. Rapid7 did a great blog analyzing the last Verizon Business Incident Report. If you look at the time to compromise a target, hackers generally do that in minutes between the initial breach and the sufficient level of compromise. If you look at the detection of that compromise, that time is measured on average in months. So minutes to compromise, months to detect. If you look at the Global Risk Report from 2019, you look at risks to humanity in general over thousands of years. Climate change is up here. If you cross-reference impact and likelihood. Cybersecurity, the industry you're now all part of because you all swore allegiance to Tanya, and I was at the back and saw you all do it, so this is all your fault now. Cybersecurity, impact versus likelihood is there after 30 years. That's the state of the industry we're all in. So that's where it's got us. Solitary Study, being the best technical practitioner you can be, and building standalone applications and infrastructure to your best technical standard. And what that strategy reminds me of is this. Now, this is someone practicing golf, which is fine. Get the best golf club you can get, practice your shot, practice over and over again. And as I say, this is fine because when you play golf, it looks like this. There's no one attacking you, there's no one distracting you. The hole's not going to move, the flag's not going to move, no one's going to take the ball away. The caddy cannot advise you. It's the best tool you can get, the best technical ability you can have. That's why this is how you practice golf. And what we've got in this industry is tactics, a training methodology based on golf. Be the best you can be, build the best thing you can independently. That has evolved without thinking into a strategy based on the same concepts like golf. And I think we're thinking about this in terms of the wrong game. Now, that's a really weird metaphorical way to look at this. So looking around at, can I justify using this kind of metaphorical way of thinking, I came across TRIZ on Wikipedia. The article's worth reading. Basically, TRIZ is the acronym for whatever's Russian for the theory of inventive problem solving. There was a science fiction author and inventor in the 1950s, went through literally every invention in the Russian system, looked at the characteristics of the problems they solved, look at the patterns in the solutions, and realized going through them all at a sufficient level of abstraction, you can use other people's solutions. Someone has already solved your problem. You can save time by looking at your problem in an abstract way. So rather than a traditional way of problem solving, you think about your problem, you think about the context of your problem, you just keep banging your head against that wall until you get the solution. The TRIZ way of thinking is you look at the world's conceptual problems and find one like yours. You look at then the solution that has been used to solve that problem and then just adopt their solution. Now, for this different way of thinking, looking at someone who's solved the problem reminds me of this from management consultancy, from business models. It's the double S-curve model. If those of you who are with startups and scale-ups will be familiar with this. At a startup, you start on what's known as an S-curve, a particular way of working. But as you can see, after a certain period of time, you put more and more effort into that way of working, and it pays less and less dividends. You get less and less reward. So you have to jump the S-curve to a different way of working to get the reward you deserve from the effort you put in. And I think that's where this industry is at. We're at what's known as an inflection point. You see there in the middle, known as a strategic inflection point. You have to change the way you work or things will not continue, or things will not improve. And talking to leading TRIZ consultant Dowell Mann of Systemic Innovation, he said to find who's got a problem like yours so you can find the solution, look for someone who has a more extreme version of your problem. Because I think if our problem was like golf, just be the best you can be and that's the way to solve the problem, we'd all look like this guy. And if you know anyone who's worked in cybersecurity longer than the 3 or 4 hours most of you have worked in cybersecurity, you know they all look like this. And various conversations I've had today with some of the older members of the industry have backed that up. So think about the problems you have in cybersecurity, think about the people you've spoken to, thinking about maybe the problems you've had, the incidents you've been involved with, the demands you've been under. Think about the day that involves, think about how that looks, think about how that sounds, think about how that feels, think about your colleagues, think about your manager's demands. I think it feels something like this.
The pages drop into coverage in this plan. This is a form of a combination coverage.
You have to be kidding me. That isn't possible.
We know assignments. We know our alignments. We know our schemes.
Now, looking around the room, some of you are thinking, oh great, sports, especially in Seattle. That's exactly why I came to DevSecCon. Others of you have noticed my accent and thinking, oh great, the Brit has flown over here to literally tell us about the sport they call in the UK American football. But bear with me, I think there's a lot in common between the NFL and cybersecurity. First of all, if you don't understand it, it makes no sense at all. For those of you who haven't grown up with the sport, why are they stopping and starting? What on earth is the terminology they're saying? What is going on? Cybersecurity, if you've tried to explain it to your friends, to your relatives. You've all got that to look forward to over Thanksgiving and Christmas. Exactly the same. Makes no sense. The concepts make no sense. Incredibly complex, both of them. Both team games, something we miss a lot. Both the people you work with, the people you work against, is something we don't realize at all. Very highly specialized, both by situation and in attack and defense. I would argue it's the only sport like that. Of course, they've both got offensive and defensive playbooks, especially instant response, and both, most importantly, are a fight over territory. There are enough similarities between the two that maybe the people facing that problem at an abstract level have solved ours. And not only should we learn something from American football, or as you call it over here, football, I think there's a lot to learn from warfare as well, the actual study of warfare and especially war gamers, and what is called in the UK operational research. I think in the US it's called operations research. But looking at what we can learn from football, who should we learn from? Now, as some of you will know, an American football team is so big, you've got two sides, as I say. When you've got the ball and when you haven't, the offense and the defense. We're defenders, so we should look to a defense. Now, I might be a bit biased, but I've been following the Seattle Seahawks since I was about 15 years old. It's so long ago, I can only say about 15 years. So I think the team to look at is the Seattle Seahawks and the Legion of Boom. As some of you will know, the Legion of Boom being the name of the Seattle Seahawks defense from 2011 to 2015. Looking at their players, Sherman, Thomas, Chancellor, but really the philosophy and way of and methodology of everyone on that defense. There's all sorts of sports arguments as to why that's the case. In this city, of all cities, I would hope I don't need to go over the statistics and why the team was impressive, but the most important one is for 4 years straight, they did what a defense is meant to do. They led the league in stopping the opponent's scoring. So, what can we learn? What lessons are there in an abstract way from the Legion of Boom and Pete Carroll? Lesson 1, train how you fight. Now, a very abstract and high-level look at Pete Carroll's whole methodology and way of thinking, win forever, which is what we want to do in cybersecurity. One of the main parts of that is practice is everything. Now, as you know, as I say, a team is so big, you've got first string and second string players. That means when you practice, for example, if you're about to play the New Orleans Saints on Sunday, with or without Drew Brees by the sounds of it, your second string defense can imitate the defense you're going to play on Sunday. Your second string offense can imitate the offense you play on Sunday. So by the time you play the New Orleans Saints on Sunday, actually you've been playing them all week. So you're in a better state to play them when it matters. Now this links to a wargaming concept called the Caffrey Triangle, named after its creator, Matt Caffrey. What happens in military exercises is you tend to have the red team, the OP4, the opposition force in any military exercise, tends to be down here. Stimulate the game objectives. Don't make it look bad that we just spent however many $1 billion on an aircraft carrier. Make it look good. Just fall over when the gun goes bang. As you know, if you've worked with penetration tests in cybersecurity, they tend to be up here, win at all costs. They will break into your systems in the best way they can think of, fit in their tool set, which is fine, except that pen test team is not your adversary, the way it should be in any practice. The idea of the scout team. Down here, follow doctrine. The attackers you pay for, the red team, the OP4 in an exercise, the penetration testers, should imitate the attackers you're actually up against. Now, if you want a less, moving away from wargaming, the same idea comes into cybersecurity. Look at this presentation from 2018. We're on the Wall by Bergerman and Smeets. They cover the same thing, but they use a quadrant rather than a triangle. And this whole theory of how you imitate opponents, there's all sorts of links on this. There's far too many, far too many tabs open, far too many references I could use. But the one analogy that sticks and works is that of a sparring partner. When you, as a boxer or a boxer's trainer, when you use a sparring partner, you don't use the sparring partner to beat up your boxer. You use the sparring partner to make your boxer better. That's the whole point of every security test, anything you run undergoes. As per Adam, and you need to do it as early as possible, as per Adam Shostak's presentation back in BrewCon 06, you don't want to threat model when the X-Wings are going down the trench. Do it as early as possible in that process. I don't need to explain shift left, I think, to anyone in this room. If you want a good presentation on this, especially the kind of speed and scale that you need to implement within your CI/CD pipelines, this presentation from DevSecCon 2018 in London by Stuart Winter-Tier is worth watching. Of course, for tools, the first thing you should look at is OWASP ZAP. If you're lucky enough that your infrastructure and application is all code because it's modern enough that everything is code, look at threat modeling as code. Look at threat spec by Fraser Scott is worth looking at. And the reason you do this, as per the NFL scout team, you know roughly who you're up against, and you've got limited resources. You can't defend against everything. You can't be ready to protect yourself against everyone. And this is something that they realized in the military. There's an excellent report from 1991 by Rand called The Base of Sand Problem. Full of, basically they looked at military modeling, they looked at wargaming, they looked at military simulations, and realized they were doing it wrong, spending billions of dollars unnecessarily, and costing lives, because they were analyzing the situation in the wrong way. As per this footnote, particularly struck me, battle outcomes have historically borne no relationship to the raw force ratio. It's not just who's got the biggest tanks or the most tanks, or the biggest helicopters, or the most soldiers, or the best weapons, or the most bullets. What matters is the ratio of effective forces. It's how many people you actually bring to the point of attack that's important, and that's the lesson. So one of the lessons to take away from Pete Carroll and the idea of the scout team. Practice is everything. Next lesson, eliminate the big play. Now, for some of you, I could probably introduce you to the way the Legion of Boom played, which is a cover 3 with a single high free safety. Some of you around the room, I expect, could explain this, a lot more about this to me than I know. We don't need to, thankfully, we don't need to get into the detail. The basics is, if you look at a typical setup, San Francisco 49ers on offense with the ball, Seattle Seahawks on defense without the ball. Traditionally, NFL defenses have emphasized the defensive line. The biggest players close to the ball, close to the opponents. It makes sense. What Pete Carroll did was emphasize the linebackers and especially the defensive backs, and especially, and apologies to any Seahawks fans in the audience, now a player with the Baltimore Ravens, Earl Thomas, the free safety. It's the last line of defense that's most important. And that's the position Carroll used to play in college. The reason he does this is because the NFL, you can gain yards, but you don't necessarily score points. As long as you stop your opponent scoring points, those yards don't actually matter. In the same way, to take a slide from Adrian Sanabria's presentation at RSA 2018, the way we think about cybersecurity is that's it. You get hacked and you're done. Game over. When actually, you've got the whole cyber kill chain. You've got a whole set of steps that an attacker has to go through before achieving actions and objectives. So you've got, if you see it the right way, all these points where you can stop an opponent compromising your systems. Now, it depends what you use. I had a really great conversation over lunch about IoT, about cyber physical. If someone breaks into your furnace and sets it too hot so it literally explodes, it's too late. You can't recover. But for some of you, the systems you use, the things you build, the whole 5 core functions of the NIST cybersecurity framework are appropriate. You can respond and recover. You can have a detect that's better than the months that it is on average. And still, that breach doesn't matter. The opponent has gained yards, but they haven't scored. In the same way, there's a great series of presentations by Sunil Yu who's been given at RSA, where he's looked at those 5 columns of the NIST, the core NIST functions, and mapped where products tend to fit, where vendors are selling you things you can use related to those 5 core functions. And that's where you're compromised. You can see how much emphasis there is on products before you're compromised, rather than how little there is after, especially, and this is slightly out of date, but especially considering so many of you work with applications, that gap there. So once your application is compromised, that's it. There's no way to detect, respond, or recover. There are products in this space, but that's where you should look, because your application can be resilient and yet still occasionally be vulnerable, occasionally be compromised. If you want to look at the whole concept of cyber resilience, I'd recommend this blog by Phil Huggins. His blog title is Black Swan Security, not related to the company of the same name. For these concepts, the 3 points that really stick out for me are experiential learning and threat simulation, which fits in with the Scout team idea, situational awareness, and especially the pace of decision making, which a long line across that investigation wall brings us to Colonel John Boyd of the United States Air Force. Now, he was a pilot in the Korean War and the Vietnam War in the 50s and 60s, advocated speed over might, over force in air combat. Realized that that's the way you win that kind of complex conflict. And from there, extrapolated, that's how you win any kind of complex conflict. You make better decisions faster than your opponent. It's not that just have the biggest force you can. That does not work. Now, he introduced the OODA Loop, which there's a lot of material on. I've read relatively little. The OODA Loop: observe, orient, decide, act. You start at the top. You observe the situation you're in and where your opponent is. You then orient yourself in relation to your opponent. You then decide the best action to take in order for you to defeat your opponent. You then carry out that action. And you go around that loop, and you go around that loop faster than your opponent. Is how you win complex conflicts, which is exactly the kind of conflict we're in cybersecurity. Now, this was back in the 60s and 70s. The military is still figuring out how to do this. I was at the Connections Wargaming Conference at King's College London a couple of weeks ago. There was a great presentation there by Captain Phil McLary of the Norwegian military. Now, because the modern way of fighting is so complex, he gave this presentation on the use of war games as pedagogy, how to teach people how to understand the concepts they need, how to become better strategic thinkers. And he, of course, covered the OODA Loop as well in this, because the OODA Loop relates to maneuver warfare, as opposed to the old way of fighting. The old way of fighting is this: attrition warfare. You just kill more of your enemy than they kill of you. The classic Stalin quote of quantity has a quality all of its own, which is, as discussed in presentations this morning, all of your code will always be secure. You'll cover all possible vulnerabilities. You'll think of everything. That kind of mentality does not work in modern complex conflicts, which is what we're all in. What we have to think of is something like the idea of maneuver warfare. As you can see there with this slide that Captain McLary kindly provided to me, is current doctrine in US Marine Corps, Norwegian Army, NATO, British Army, and so on. You see at the bottom, if you're red, you go through that OODA process quicker than your opponent. By the end of going through it, there's a decision lag. You have executed what they call collapse in the OODA loop. You are making decisions so fast, your opponent is just watching you make decisions and can't keep up. That's what you should aim for. Now, getting into like attrition versus maneuver warfare, stretching this analogy, there are so many things I could go into. There are so many things I need to read and then go into. But to keep it simple, as I say, it's the OODA loop. Go around the OODA loop faster than your opponent, you'll win a complex conflict. However, we have a problem. The attacker always goes first. They start going around their loop. Then at some point we detect we're being attacked and we start our OODA loop. So you're in a race where you always start behind. So how do you deal with that? How do you win a race when your attackers always go first? Which brings me to the last lesson that we can get from Pete Carroll and the Legion of Boom. Out-hit your opponent. Now, going back to that Rand paper from 1991, as you can see there, the evidence of history is that soft factors, command control processes, tactics, and strategy are first-order determinants of deterrence and war outcomes. Not force, not size. The way you fight, the strategy you use, decides whether you win or not, but from their study of literally thousands of years of history. So as I say, We look to the Legion of Boom for this. Look to those three members I mentioned, Sherman, Thomas, Chancellor, and look to the way the Seattle Seahawks played. If you're familiar with the Seahawks and this tackling video, Seahawks have a tackling technique called the shoulder punch. It's literally that. You hit your opponent with your shoulder. You'll see Sherman coming in from the left. You can push Jared Goff out of bounds, or you can hit him out of bounds. It's medically defined as a collision sport, make an impact. You'll see Earl Thomas coming in from the right. Earl Thomas is 5'10", 200 pounds. The guy getting up from the ground is now retired tight end Rob Gronkowski, 6'8", 270, if I remember rightly. The application of the force you have correctly, it's not being the biggest. But as Seahawks fans will know, if we're going to cover the shoulder punch, I need you to introduce you to the highlight reel of Cam, Bam Bam, Chancellor.
Bam Bam, yeah. I actually got a tattoo on my shoulders. I call them my stamps. But when I hit you, it's a stamp I'm putting on you.
And this is why. A breach is not an incident. It's not like a fire. It's not like a flood. It's not like an earthquake. A breach is an attack. An attack by a human adversary with their own weaknesses. You are not playing golf. What Cam Chancellor did, what the Legion of Boom did, what the Seattle Seahawks did, the way they were always described, they set the tone of the game. You will gain yards against the Legion of Boom, you will score points against the Legion of Boom, but it will hurt every time you try, succeed, or fail. And that had an impact in the way opponents played. It's that. This is going to hurt, and it's going to hurt for the entire game. As Richard Sherman said of Chancellor, he damages people's souls. If you're in a conflict with an opponent, you want to have an effect on that opponent. There's a great article last year written about the Legion of Boom by the Bleacher Report. What made them horrifying was a blend of belligerence and violence, unmatched in its era. And that belligerence is the thing I think we're missing in cybersecurity. If you look at incident response, the way we deal with incidents, it's based roughly on the Met Police model. You assign commanders at different levels of operational, tactical, or strategy. You then deal with the incident is then dealt with. Cybersecurity attacks are not incidents. Like I say, this is not a fire or a flood. Now, usually at this point, I relate this to David Bianco's pyramid of pain. Inflict pain on your opponent, make them think twice about the actions they're taking, about the decisions they're making. The difference between the hash values of the malware they're using, they'll write new malware and change the hash value. You figure out their TTPs, their tools, techniques, and procedures. They've got to change the entire way they work. But there's more to this, and this is where there should be the big finish, and I should give you some answers. But all I've got is some seedlings. But it's that. We're involved in a conflict with adversary. There's something about counterattacking. It's a long line against the investigation wall. Chess. If you look at chess, you look at Magnus Carlsen. Almost beat Kasparov at 13. There's lots of statistics. All you need to know, he's #1 ranked in the world. You read about the way he plays, his strategy. Positional, not tactical. He's thinking in the longer term. He exhausts opponents. He just wears them down. And the word used to describe him is nettlesomeness. Nettlesomeness being defined, and which can be measured through chess analytics, the ability to make opponents make mistakes, which I don't think we have in cybersecurity. It's like golf. Well, I'll just be better than you. I'll be more secure than attackers. I'll know more as a penetration tester than the hackers trying to get into your network. There's no nettlesomeness there. Another long line across the investigation wall, you look at Jurgen Klopp, current manager of Liverpool Football Club, soccer in the UK. Loads of victories both as manager of Dortmund and then manager of Liverpool. Thing you need to know is his main strategy is called gegenpressen. I think sort of manipulated into the British gegenpressing. It's basically like the full court press in basketball. As soon as the opponent has the ball, and especially if the opponent has gained the ball from you, you go to get it back. You don't make sure all your teammates are in position. You don't make sure you're ready to defend. You just go get the ball back. So as soon as your opponent has the ball, they immediately know they are immediately going to be under attack. It forces their OODA loop so much faster than everybody sort of gets to start from a new position. Another long line against the wall, across the investigation wall. This, of course, brings us to Tekken. If you're familiar with Tekken, you know it's basically a one-on-one fighting game. You take a controller, represent one of the players. You have to hit someone, you have to hit your opponent more than they hit you. Look at Tekken, look at Arslan Ash. Now Tekken, the way you fight Tekken professionally in esports, dominated by these 4 areas. These 4 areas, basically the way they fight is aggressive. It's a fighting game. You just hit your opponent faster and quicker than they hit you. Because of visa problems, there's also a big Tekken community in Pakistan. Pakistan was isolated. Now the Pakistani style of playing Tekken was based on something called the whiff punish. Your opponent makes a mistake, their character will still be going through that punch, the animation will still be going through that punch, then you punish them and you hit them as often as you can. Now they've made an error. Now introduce Arslan Ash, who after circumventing many visa problems, literally turned up at the EVO esports event earlier this year. Who is this guy? He's not from the countries we know about. There's great videos, there's a long story. I would encourage looking him up, but the TLDR, all you need to know, he used space and counterattacks. He was defined by the whiff punish. It's like a Hollywood movie. He beat everybody. Not he did well, not he was faster, not he was more practiced. He was really good, but through a different strategy that emphasized making your opponent make mistakes and then punish them for making mistakes, he beat everybody. You are, of course, thinking, what the hell? I'm here at a security conference. Tanya's just inducted me into this industry. Now some guy's telling me about fighting games. Why on earth am I spending my time doing this? I think the problem is, it's about that effect on the adversary. We are in a conflict with someone, and I can have a better conversation and get a better analysis from a video game of the effect on the adversary and how you respond to their attacks and how you force them to make mistakes than I can from a multi-billion-dollar industry. And I think that's the problem. If you also want to use analogies from video games and want some justification, look at The Strategy of No Strategy, another work by Adam Elkus, well-respected military analyst. If you want to actually look at this, then this idea technically, then a good project is App Sensor from OWASP. Matt Pendlebury's covered this in a presentation at London DevSecCon last year. Because this is the thing. It's all about OODA loops. It's all about making better decisions faster than your opponent. And we keep trying to be faster. I think the key point is it's relative speed. Something we forget in cybersecurity is if you slow your opponent down, it's much easier to make faster decisions than them. So what lessons are there? What lessons are there from the Legion of Boom? First lesson actually is just use others' lessons. Cybersecurity, as I say, has been going for like 30 years. Other areas of conflict have been going on for millennia. There are lessons we can learn from them. From the Legion of Boom specifically, practice is everything. The way you attack your applications, the way you threat model. Eliminate the big play. Depends what you're running, but you can be breached without the game being lost. Also, out-hit your opponent. I've got half-formed ideas. I've got weird analogies. I've got dramatic videos. It all kind of makes a point, but you're not sure, and you'll need to think about it more. But think about it more, because I don't think we have in the industry yet. Or, well, it was fun. It'll give you something to say to people. It was interesting that that Brit came over and told us about the Seahawks literally in Seattle, like we didn't know anything about them. And keep playing like golfers. Keep practicing like golfers. Get the best tools you can. Be the best golfer you can. But I think if we do that, we're trying to be a golfer playing American football.
Miller Lite presents Contact Ball. Yeah! We're still on the first hole lot, and this is Davis teeing it up. Here's the drive. Brought to you by Miller Lite. You can combine great taste and versatility. You can combine anything. Oh, he's got daylight going for the green. Here's the putt. There's the light. Good here. Great taste, less filling. Get your American best.
Now, it's funny to watch, but sometimes, as I say, Tanya's all inducted you into the profession, can feel like that. You're playing a different sport. That's not the way to do this. So I've shown you a few jigsaw pieces around the investigation wall. I hope I haven't given you answers, but I've given you something different to think about and a metaphorical way of looking for those answers. So thank you for your attention and your time. I look forward to your feedback. Do we have time for questions or a question? We can move on if you like. No, I think there won't be any questions, judging by the face from the back. So thank you again, everyone. I'll pack up the microphone and get ready for the next speaker.